You know, they were the power couple that defined a whole generation. I mean, they reshaped the Democratic Party, dominated the global stage. They practically lived in the White House. But today,
Today, it's like they can't even get a text back from their own party.
it's an incredible fall from grace.
It is. And, the sources we have in front of us, they almost paint it as inevitable.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We are digging into a stack of articles that tell a pretty wild story about, well, political gravity. It is February 2026, and the ground has definitely shifted under some very famous feet.
We aren't just looking at a news cycle here. This feels like the end of an era.
And it all centers on a vote, a really shocking vote that happened just this week in the House Committee on Oversight and Reform.
Yeah, that roll call. It's something else.
Let's set the scene for you. It's 2026. Republicans control the House. They've been digging into the Jeffrey Epstein files, specifically the connections to former President Bill Clinton.
Right. So they subpoenaed him to testify. He refused, and it all went to a contempt vote.
And 10, 15 years ago, you know exactly how this plays out.
Oh, absolutely. The partisan wagon circle. The Democrats all line up. They call it a witch hunt, and they protect their guy, protect the brand.
But looking at the sources from the Hill and the analysis pieces we've got, that is not what happened.
Not even close. 9 Democrats broke ranks.
9 of them. They crossed the aisle and voted with the Republicans to hold Bill Clinton in contempt of Congress.
And it wasn't just the usual suspects. I mean, you had Representative Maxwell Frost from Florida really leading the charge on this.
He's what, 28 years old? The first Gen Z member of Congress?
Yeah. And his quote in the transcript we have here, it's really the thesis for this whole story. He said, "This vote isn't about allegiances to individuals. It's about finding the truth."
Truth over allegiance. Wow. That is a brutal sign-off for the Clinton dynasty.
It is. And as you dig into the other pieces, the ones from the Western Journal on the right and, the progressive blogs on the left, it becomes really clear this isn't just about Jeffrey Epstein.
No, Epstein is the catalyst.
He's the catalyst, sure. But the underlying condition, if you want to call it that, is the complete and total collapse of the Clinton brand and, maybe more importantly, the ideology they championed.
The famous third way.
The third way. So today we're going to unpack what that actually was, why it was so successful for the Democrats in the 90s, and why now, in 2026, the only thing the modern left and the modern right seem to agree on is that they both want it dead.
I think we have to start with the history, because it's easy to forget just how desperate things were for the Democrats back then. I was reading these background notes on the Democratic Leadership Council, the DLC. You really have to go back to the 80s.
Well, you do. The Democrats are in the absolute wilderness. I mean, Ronald Reagan had crushed them twice. Then George H.W. Bush wins.
And the perception among the average voter was that the Democratic Party was the party of tax and spend.
Tax and spend, big government, special interests. All of it. They were losing the white middle class. They were losing the suburbs. They were getting annihilated in presidential elections.
So the DLC forms, and this young governor from Arkansas, Bill Clinton, becomes the face of it. And they come up with this new Democrat strategy.
The third way.
The third way. And our notes here break it down into 3 pillars: opportunity, responsibility, and community. I think we should dig into these because they sound like buzzwords, but they were huge policy shifts.
They really were. Let's start with opportunity. This was a rejection of the old liberal idea of, equality of outcome.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Well, the third way argument was that government shouldn't just guarantee you a result or just, redistribute wealth. The state's job was to be an enabler.
Less, here's a welfare check, and more, here's a job training program.
Exactly. The government gives you the tools, education, infrastructure, stuff like that, so you can go compete in the global marketplace. It was a full-on embrace of the free market.
Then you get the second pillar, which, looking back, is maybe even more controversial: responsibility.
Right. And you can see this so clearly in the 1996 Welfare Reform Bill. I mean, this wasn't just a tweak. This was a fundamental change to the social contract.
It was the end of the unconditional safety net.
Completely. The mantra was no rights without responsibilities. They were explicitly saying the era of entitlement is over. If you want help from the government, you have to work for it. There are time limits.
It was all about fiscal discipline, balancing the budget to prove Democrats could be trusted with the money.
And then there's a third one, community, which, sounds pretty good on the surface.
But in the 90s, that was basically code for something else, wasn't it?
It was. It was a pivot away from what they called identity politics and a hard pivot toward shared national values. And the biggest policy expression of that
Law and order.
being tough on crime. To win back those suburban voters who were, really scared about the crime waves of the early 90s, the third way embraced more police, three strikes laws, a very, very rigid approach to justice.
And you can't argue with the results politically. Bill Clinton won 2 terms. He broke the Republican lock on the presidency. He balanced the budget.
For that specific moment in time, it was the perfect political formula. It worked. It solved the problem of the 1980s.
Which brings us back to today. If it was so successful, why are we sitting here in 2026 watching his own party vote to hold him in contempt? Why is the brand so radioactive?
Well, you've got 2 different firing squads. You have the right and you have the left. And they're coming at him for completely different reasons.
Okay, let's start with the right, because they're the ones who started this contempt vote. The sources we have from the Western Journal and Fox News, they're all about one thing. They call it the baggage.
And it is a lot of baggage. The Epstein connection is the big headline now. The sources are all talking about the flight logs for the Lolita Express, the folks...
Right, this is just the final chapter in a very long book, right?
Exactly. It's the capstone on a pyramid of scandal. You have Juanita Broaddrick, Kathleen Willey, Monica Lewinsky.
And the argument you see in these conservative sources is all about the double standard. They feel like they watched for decades as the media and the Democrats just circled the wagons.
Remember the whole vast right-wing conspiracy defense?
Of course.
The feeling on the right is that Democrats willfully ignored all these credible allegations for years simply because Clinton was politically useful to them.
And now that he's not useful anymore.
Well, that's the whole point. I found this one quote from a Democratic lobbyist in the source material that just sums it all up. He says, "At this point, they bring nothing but baggage."
Wow.
So the right sees this contempt vote, and they don't see Democrats having some kind of moral awakening. They see a cold, political, transactional dump.
One of the articles used a pretty visceral metaphor for it, saying Bill Clinton attracts scandal the way a strip joint attracts syphilis.
It's crude, but it gets at the feeling of fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
The right is basically saying, you don't get credit for dumping him now, 30 years too late, just because he can't win you any more elections.
So the right sees corruption and hypocrisy. But what about the left? Because those 9 Democrats who voted with the Republicans, they aren't listening to conservative talk radio.
No. This is what we're calling the progressive rupture. And honestly, this is the more fatal wound for the third way as an idea. If the right hates the person, the modern left hates the policy.
They see it as a betrayal, not a victory.
Exactly. Let's drill down on the economics. We talked about opportunity meaning an embrace of the free market. For progressives today, that translates to one word: NAFTA.
The North American Free Trade Agreement.
Yeah. In the 90s, the argument was that free trade would create new, high-tech jobs and lower prices for consumers. But the modern left looks at the last 30 years, and they see the Rust Belt getting completely hollowed out.
They argue that those policies just shift working-class jobs overseas.
And that those communities, which used to be the bedrock of the Democratic Party, were just abandoned. Which, of course,
paved the way for someone like Donald Trump to come in and appeal directly to those voters.
Precisely. The argument from the left is that the third way literally created the conditions for Trumpism. And then there's Wall Street.
Rubinomics, named after Robert Rubin, his Treasury Secretary.
The whole idea behind Rubinomics was if you make the bond markets happy by cutting the deficit, by deregulating finance, then the whole economy grows. So they repealed Glass-Steagall. They let the banks run wild.
And the progressive argument now is that this led directly to the 2008 financial crash.
Directly. They see the third way as basically corporate republicanism light, a party that got in bed with Goldman Sachs and totally forgot about the Union Hall.
And it's not just the economics. We have to go back to that community pillar, the law and order part, the 1994 crime bill.
That right there is maybe the deepest scar for the modern progressive coalition. The third way's effort to win over white suburban voters led directly to mass incarceration.
The 3 strikes laws, the money for new prisons.
I mean, it devastated black communities. So when a young congressman like Maxwell Frost looks at Bill Clinton, he isn't seeing the guy who was once called the first black president.
No.
He sees the architect of a system that locked up an entire generation of young black men. He sees the guy who gutted the welfare state.
One of the critiques I was reading made a really interesting point about the generational divide. It's almost an okay boomer moment for the Democratic Party.
It absolutely is. You have to remember, Gen Z, younger millennials, they don't remember the 1980s. They didn't live through the Democrats losing 49 states in an election. They don't have the trauma of Reagan.
So there's no sense of gratitude.
Zero gratitude. They don't feel like the Clintons saved the party. They just look at the world they inherited. Crushing student debt, a climate crisis, inequality, and they trace a lot of it right back to those neoliberal third-way policies of the 90s.
They don't see a savior. They see a sellout.
Exactly. And you can't talk about the collapse of the brand without talking about 2016.
Oh, for sure. Hillary Clinton's loss. That was the death knell.
It was. And the sources described that campaign as the ultimate failure of the whole third-way model.
Yeah.
It was just pure hubris.
The private email server, for one.
The server, yeah. The paid speeches to Wall Street banks right before you announce you're running for president, I mean, it reinforced every single negative stereotype.
That they were above the rules and that they were owned by corporate interests.
And the strategy itself was classic third way. Focus on the professional class, suburban voters. They just assumed the working class in places like Wisconsin and Michigan would show up.
They didn't even visit Wisconsin. It's still amazing.
It is. And there's this really scathing critique in our sources that argues the third way left the Democratic Party institutionally weak and ideologically empty.
What does that mean exactly?
The idea is that the Clintons built this incredible machine to win elections for themselves, but they didn't build a movement. They hollowed out local parties, centralized all the money and power, and shifted the ideology so far to the center. So when they finally lost...
There was nothing left underneath. The floor just fell out.
Exactly.
Where does someone like Barack Obama fit into all this? Because he's usually seen as a break from the Clintons. But was he really?
It's so complicated. Rhetorically, he was completely different. Hope and change. It sounded so progressive. But if you actually look at how he governed, many of these sources argue he was largely a third-way politician.
The Affordable Care Act was a market-based solution, not single-payer.
Right. It was originally a conservative Heritage Foundation idea. He was constantly trying to get a grand bargain with Republicans to cut the deficit, trim Social Security. He had all the same Wall Street people in his cabinet that Clinton did.
So why didn't the brand collapse under him?
Because Obama built a new and unique coalition. He could turn out young people and minority voters in a way the Clintons never could. His own personal story and charisma. It kind of masked the rot underneath.
He held it together with personality, even while the policies were still alienating parts of the old base.
That's a good way to put it. White working-class voters were leaving the party in droves during his terms, but his huge margins with other groups just hid it. Until 2016, when you take away that Obama magic and you just run a standard third-way candidate.
The cracks become a canyon.
And now, in 2026, the cracks are the whole map. 9 Democrats vote to hold Bill Clinton in contempt. The Clinton era is officially, finally over.
It leaves a huge vacuum, though, doesn't it?
We're living in the twilight of the third way. That ideology was a tool for a very specific time, the post-Reagan world. But we just don't live there anymore. We're in a hyper-polarized era.
Yeah, centrism is not exactly a winning slogan right now.
It's a dirty word. For the right, the third way looks like elite corruption. For the left, it looks like a corporate sellout. There's no middle ground left for it to stand on.
So the Democratic Party is basically jettisoning its own longtime standard bearers to save itself.
They're cutting the anchor. It's brutal, but that's politics. The party is desperately trying to figure out what it is in the late 2020s, and the Clintons are simply in the way of that.
It's just fascinating to watch how quickly that kind of power can just evaporate. You go from being the indispensable couple to being a liability in a committee vote.
It is a harsh reminder that political gratitude has a very, very short shelf life.
So let's bring this all together for everyone listening. What's the so what here? What does this mean for the future?
It means we're watching a political realignment in real time. The era of the professional centrist who tries to triangulate between the left and the right, that's over. The electorate on both sides is demanding contrast now.
And that brings us to our final thought for this deep dive. The third way's obsession with the professional class and suburban voters, it won them elections in the 90s, but it seems pretty clear the cost was the working class.
And the question now is, if the third way is dead and the Clintons are exiled, has the Democratic Party actually found a new identity? Or are they just defined by who they aren't? They aren't Trump and now they aren't the Clintons. But can you really build a future on just being not something?
A lot to think about as we watch the headlines this week. Thanks for diving in with us. We'll see you next time.